Welcome back to Arc Maine. Joining me now is Jay Broccolo, who's the Director of Weather Operations for Mount Washington Observatory. Thanks so much, Jay, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, a little bit of background. We talked a little bit about this last week when we interviewed Charlie Peachy, a Mount Washington observer and researcher, as well as IT specialist. On November 21st, so later on this week, Mount Washington Observatory will be cutting the ribbon on 5 new weather monitoring systems, weather remote monitoring systems on the western side of Mount Washington. Now, these 5 new stations mark the start of a 4-year expansion in the observatory Mount Washington Regional Meso Network. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, Jay. A little bit background on you. Tell me a little bit about your position, more so what your day-to-day life is like.
Yeah, so as the director, I manage our summit operations as a whole, but mostly all of our weather operations, whether that be the Mesonet system, our summit weather station, our forecasts, the observers, and also just generally our science and research, as they all work together.
Awesome. So first off, for a little more background and those who don't know, could you share a little bit about what a remote weather monitoring station is and kind of what they do?
Yeah, so we call them mesonet stations, and a mesonet's really just a series of these remote monitoring stations that you're referring to. And each singular one of those stations, measures the wind speed, the direction, the temperature, the pressure. Some will do precipitation and so forth. But really what we're trying to do with them is increase the resolution of the data that we have. So the more of these singular stations that we have, the more data that we can record at different spots. So they're kind of like at your at-home weather station, but they're research grade and run off solar panels and batteries.
Awesome. So how will adding these 5 brand new ones help improve the work and the research that's already being progressively going on the mountain?
Yeah, so right now we have about 20 years worth of Mesonet data on the east side of the mountain that goes along the Mount Washington Auto Road, and a series of other stations throughout the White Mountains as well. But we don't have any on the west side of the mountain, which is the predominant direction that the air comes from, right? So here in the United States, in the Northern Hemisphere, generally our weather patterns come from the west and move to the east. Some come from the north, some come from the south, who knows? But generally they come from the west. So what we're really looking for is to know what's happening with these air parcels before they hit Mount Washington and not after. So now that we may have these ones or will have these ones or do have these ones, actually, God, I've been saying will for so long. Now that we do have them, we can compare the sides of the mountains and see how the air parcel is on the west side of the mountain, and then what the mountain does to that air parcel as it moves over and then descends the other side of the mountain.
So Charlie, last week when we talked to Charlie, he was talking about how sometimes that clouds would dissipate by the time it gets to the other side of the mountain. Is
Mhm.
there anything that you are looking forward to of trying to figure out with those new weather stations, just more so comparing the west side to the east side?
Yeah, I mean the boundary layer is one. So the boundary layer is essentially where most all of our weather happens. You're aware of that, and it tends to sit anywhere between, I don't know, 4,000 feet, 7,000 feet, and the mountains like at 6,000 feet. So using these mesonet stations, we can kind of pinpoint, at least have a better idea of where that boundary layer is. But referring to the clouds, that's where the boundary layer comes in a lot of the times. We always wonder why the clouds are flat at the bottom. And that's essentially why. That's where the boundary layer usually is. And as those clouds move up and down the mountain, whether it's some system that comes in, or maybe the mountain is forming the clouds themselves, we can measure the relative humidity. We can know how much moisture is in the air from those measurements, and also understand what the pressure and wind is, so that we can separate what the surface of the earth is affecting weather-wise versus what the free atmosphere is doing to the weather below it.
So, how will these new remote weather monitoring systems assist the observers and researchers moving forward? What are you hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, so I mean, locally, just with our forecasts alone, they'll help initialize our forecasts. When we look at the weather models, we're trying to see what parameters they're they're recording or what they're showing rather. So the more stations that we have, we can use them to corroborate what's being initialized in the models, and that'll really help us with our forecasts. But also, as I stated, the air moves west to east. So the more that we can measure ahead of us will help us with our forecasts for the people to the east of us, which, Maine is to the east of us. And it's the biggest mountain range in the Northeast, so it's going to have the largest effect. So, if we know what the weather is before it hits Maine, that's only going to help Gray Maine Station. We report all of our weather findings to the NOAA Weather Office in Gray. They're like one of our closest partnerships. I mean, I can promise you, most of the time when I've been on the summit, when we hit big wind gusts, they call me within the first few minutes. So like, hey, did that actually happen? Yeah, I mean, it's great all along, but research wise, it's really going to help us figure out, our lapse rates. And we have plans to put in a LiDAR as well. We're really going to help measure the wind field over the mountains. Ultimately, our goal is to figure out, to better understand how air moves through complex terrain being, mountains, which are all throughout Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont. So the more data we have, the more research we can put into that, the better our ability will be to understand what's happening, as climate progresses through time, but also, our weather on a day-to-day basis.
Ending out, thank you so much, Jay, for joining us. Congratulations on these new remote weather monitoring stations. I'm so excited to see what you guys are going to be doing in the future. So thank you once again, Jay, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And once again, the mountain will unveil the new remote weather monitoring stations later this Thursday. And coming up later this week on Arc Maine, we'll hear from meteorologist Ryan Munn, who will be at the ribbon cutting ceremony.